Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing well. I don't know about you, but I've been in a little bit of a reading funk since New Year's, not reading nearly as much as I would want to, but I think that this book I'll be reviewing today just broke this. If you're new to my channel, hi, my name is Rita. I'm a writer and academic from the UK. My expertise is 18th and 19th century literature, particularly the works of Jane Austen. This is what my PhD was about and my first book, which I recently published, and this is the reason why you'll find so much Austen content all over my YouTube channel. If you like my videos, then please like them and subscribe to my channel because it really helps, and thank you so much. I'm really interested not just in Austen's original novels, but also the ways in which we are reimagining them today, particularly with young audiences in mind. I think there's so much that Austen had to say about gender and class that is still relevant to our lives today. And this is why I'm so grateful that Nikki Payne has sent me her awesome first book, Pride and Protest, for me, all the way from the US. Pride and Protest is, as you might have guessed, a reimagining of Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth is Lisa, a radio DJ in her late 20s who lives in DC, and Darcy is Dorsey, this apparently evil corporate guy, the CEO for a corporation who wants to build unaffordable condos in her neighborhood. I really like the theme of gentrification and how it's used in some reimaginings of Pride and Prejudice. Another one that comes to mind for me is Ivizu Boy's Pride, which I loved. And here in Pride and Protest, it's dealt very well and used to reimagine the same lack of sensitiveness when it comes to class that Darcy in the original has and loses bit by bit, and which is such an important part of his process of personal development as a character. First of all, I love Lisa. The way she's introduced to us is so funny, and it's immediately clear that she's confident, that she has a great sense of humor, and that we're going to have a blast getting to know her. I mean, the first chapter is called Man Shortage, so already I'm interested. And just from these two words, it already sounds like Pride and Prejudice. Austen famously opened the novel with, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighborhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some or other of their daughters." This opening is basically saying the same thing as the title of the first chapter of Pride and Protest. There's a man shortage. For every young woman who would like to find a nice, eligible man, there are far less men who fit into this category. And that is when one man who's single, who's rich, suddenly moves into the neighborhood and everyone loses their freaking minds. If there were plenty of amazing men out there, Mrs. Bennet wouldn't go crazy talking about this news as if she just won the lottery.
My dear Mr. Bennet, wonderful news! Netherfield Park is let at last!
Is it?
Yes, it is, for I have just had it from Mrs. Long. And do you not want to know who has taken it?
Whoever gets this man isn't going to be a woman of average luck. She's very much going to be an outlier, the exception to the rule. So many people, I think, accuse Austen of being unrealistic, of writing a fantasy, this kind of happy ending story. But let's be honest, she is being sincere from the very beginning. Getting someone like Darcy or Bingley for yourself isn't the kind of thing that happens every day. And that is exactly the point that she's trying to make. So what Pride and Protest is showing from the get-go is that 200 years later, in some ways, not that much has changed, as we get from this opening page. Lisa is taking a call from one of her listeners who is complaining precisely about this man shortage. Lisa pressed a flashing orange button on the control board and slid the dial all the way to the top. This was her pulpit. Instead of airbrushed paintings of blonde Jesus, posters of Afrobeat stars, Punjabi crooners, K-pop idols, as a huge BTS fan, I have to say, I applaud her taste, and reggaeton bad boys competed for space on the cork wall of the small booth. Immediately, this is so subtle but so clever what she's doing here. Women are living in a society where there is a shortage of good men, which means that they may end up in situations in which they find themselves competing against each other precisely for these men. However, in Lisa's booth, it's men that are competing for her space. It's men who are in competition with each other for her attention and her affection. So this immediately gives us a clue that Lisa is not going to fall for that. She's not going to buy into this competition. She's not going to sacrifice any of her principles. She has to be one too. And the original Pride and Prejudice does something actually very similar. The first time Elizabeth is introduced to us immediately makes her stand out from other women. Mr. Bennet pretends to not understand why his wife is getting all excited that this rich man has just moved into the neighborhood. So he makes her spell it out, and she says it's because he might end up marrying one of their daughters. So Mr. Bennet has to introduce everyone to him as quickly as he possibly can. And to this, Mr. Bennet says to wind her up that she should go instead, not him, and says, "I will send a few lines by you to assure him of my hearty consent of his marrying whichever he chooses of the girls, though I must throw in a good word for my Lizzie." And afterwards, he adds that none of his daughters have much to recommend him, which is nice, very, very nice of a father to say. But he adds that Lizzie has something more of quickness than her sisters.
They're all silly and ignorant like other girls. Well, Lizzie has a little more wit than the rest. But then he may prefer a stupid wife, as others have done before him. There, will that do?
So immediately we know that Elizabeth is not like anyone else that you will meet. She's her father's favorite, and even though he talks pretty dismissively of all women in general, he describes her as being more intelligent than others. And this piques our interest. We want to know what makes Lizzie so special, what makes her stand out, what makes her father's favorite. Same with Lisa. What is it about Lisa that makes her able to hang on to this confidence so that everyone else is going to be competing for these few and far in between eligible men while she's not bothered, and if anything, sees them as having to compete for her? This caller brings up the topic of the construction going on in the new Netherfield court, or as Lisa puts it, the overpriced luxury apartments that will force us out of our neighborhood and change the fabric of DC forever. So straight away, it's clear how she feels about this, and it's also clear what the bone of contention between her and this love interest is going to be. This is the premise of the book. Lisa is going to do whatever she can, even though she is someone who lacks both money and social position, to stop these apartments from getting built and causing the gentrification of her neighborhood. I had to laugh too because the people Lisa believes are going to move into these apartments, which she is conceiving as Satan itself, she describes as the type of people who carry dogs in their purses and stand in line for vegan cupcakes. She says the vegan cupcakes line several times, and as a vegan who would definitely stand in line for good vegan desserts, I just had to laugh at this. Soon enough, Lisa and Dorsey meet, and this moment is so good. It's so awkward that I was feeling secondhand embarrassment for Lisa as I was reading it. So Lisa decides to go to this fancy Netherfield gala Dorsey's company is throwing to stage a protest against the construction of Netherfield Court. I promise this is not a spoiler. This happens within like the first 5 pages. She's trying to get in carrying placards when she runs into Dorsey. Now, Dorsey is Filipino. He has been adopted by white American parents. So when Lisa first meets him, she takes one look at him and assumes that he must be working class. I know. And that he must be part of the catering staff for the event, that he can't possibly be the evil CEO for the company that she's about to go up against. So you know where this is gonna go, right? So as Dorsey puts it, people like this insipid woman with ridiculous hair did not see past his race to determine his position in society. So immediately they're judging each other and creating a misunderstanding based on their own prejudices and misconceptions and preconceptions about people. And this is what they'll have to entangle and let go of throughout the rest of the novel. It's so awkward because Lisa actually tries to bribe him, this multi-millionaire, with $20. And as you're reading this, you're like, no, please stop. But at the same time, they start flirting with each other and the conversation gets pretty heated in a good way. So despite these misconceptions, it's obvious that these two people have instant chemistry, which as the reader, that's what you want to see. And my favorite thing about Lisa is how funny she is. And in this moment at the beginning of the novel, this comes through so well. After meeting Dorsey, for example, she thinks that dark-eyed waiter could toss her around all night and never call her back, and Lisa would not be mad. I mean, how can you not love her? And Dorsey, like the character in the original novel, also turns out to be a sweetheart, and I totally fell in love with him too. The world that he navigates is also full of pitfalls for him, to the point that he struggles to trust people because he can never be really sure as to their motives. As the novel says, you either bought into the false adoration and thought you were God's gift to women, or became cynical about everyone's motives. He had been leaning too far into the cynical direction lately. So he's afraid that women are going to use him for his money, which explains his standoffishness and makes it a lot easier to empathize with. And I loved so many things about this book. Nikki Payne really thought up of such cool scenarios for reimagining key scenes in Pride and Prejudice. So instead of Jane having to stay at Netherfield because she caught a cold and Elizabeth staying there because she's gone over to look after her, we have a snowstorm. So we need to create the same kind of opportunity for Dorsey and for Lisa to be in close quarters, and this happens with them being stuck in a building because there's a snowstorm. And you will never think of night pods the same way. And the give and take in their banter is absolutely top notch. In this moment in the novel, Nikki Payne adapts the scene in which Darcy is talking about what to him an accomplished woman must be like, which in the original makes Lizzie declare that she's never met a woman like that and basically pokes fun at him for having ridiculously high expectations. And the implication is, well, thank goodness I'm not one of these women trying to impress you, because clearly we're all being set up for failure.
I'm no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I rather wonder now at your knowing any.
Are you so severe on your own sex?
I never saw such a woman. She would certainly be a fearsome thing to behold.
And here in Pride and Protest, we're talking about friendship, but Dorsey's comeback is so flirty and so funny. So this is one thing that Nikki Payne does really, really well. The elements that in the original novel are more subtle, but clearly have this element of flirting to them, here become more openly so, and they're so much fun to read. Seriously, you have to read this book. I also really liked the aspects of this book that were different from the original. Bingley is the one who is old money here instead of Darcy, which I thought was really interesting. We are told that his family came over on the Mayflower, so the element of class that is so important in Pride and Prejudice is also very central here. And the Wickham character is a really interesting one, less prevalent than in the original, but I liked that because I was really enjoying the development of the relationship between Lisa and Dorsey. So I liked that their conflict became more about Netherfield Court and the gentrification that it threatens than about Wickham specifically. And I loved the way that Lisa got rid of the Mr. Collins character. I promise you that any book reader is going to love this. And in my copy, I actually wrote in the margins, this is the way to say no to the Mr. Collinses of the world. And I really liked the way in which various moments in the novel kept coming back to that idea of the beginning of society pitting women against each other because of that shortage of men.
How do you like my husband, Lizzie? I believe you envy me. Was he not a favourite of yours once?
Not at all, I assure you.
What a pity we didn't all go to Brighton. I could have got husbands for all my sisters.
Thank you for my share of the favour, but I don't particularly like your way of getting husbands.
Elizabeth in the original wasn't having this, and neither is Lisa, despite the fact that her mother does really want to make her think that way, and at some point even tells her this about the Charlotte Lucas character. I hope you saw the town car they rode in while you came in soggy and tired from the rain. I hope you saw that princess cut on her fat hand compared to your ashy, chipped nail polished hands. I hope it eats you alive that your fat, plain friend got one over on you. And of course, this doesn't eat at Lisa at all, which we expect from the very first page, even if we didn't know that this was a Pride and Prejudice reimagining, because we already know that Lisa doesn't put herself into that position in which she sees all women as being in competition with each other. This moment in the novel with these really harsh words shows really well that, again, in many ways, sadly, not much has changed for women just over 200 years since the original novel was published. The messed up ways in which we teach women to measure their happiness, in which we convince them that money and getting one over each other is worth more than our happiness, our dignity, and our principles, have to go. And this is something that Austen was already saying back in 1813.
No, Jane. I take your place now. You must go lower, because I am a married woman. Mrs. Wickham.
Lord, how droll that sounds.
I had so much fun reading this book. It's the Pride and Prejudice reimagining that I will be comparing all the next ones to from now on. It's such a great book in its own right, and it's saying so many important things about how gendered, class-based, and race-based expectations and preconceptions keep impacting young people in very real ways today. And there's so many things that I have kept coming back to after finishing this book. Like when I was reading it, I had to make a quick pause in my reading to go and find out what Aretha Franklin's Spirit in the Dark sounded like. You'll get what I mean. So to sum it all up, I can absolutely recommend Pride and Protest. I think it's my favorite reimagining of Pride and Prejudice to date, and do yourself a favor and read this book. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned to all my future videos. And until then, stay well and keep reading.